The wind moved softly across the dry streets of Aurelia, a human world that once had bright cities and tall towers, but now had broken walls and silent roads. The sky was a pale orange from the dust that hung in the air. The people walked slowly with heads down, wearing old clothes patched many times. They spoke in quiet voices, and their eyes often looked at the ground, for they knew the Tarkhan guards could be anywhere. The Tarkhan were tall, alien rulers with hard-scaled skin and long arms that ended in sharp claws. Their armor was black and silver, their voices deep and cold. They walked the streets like they owned every stone, because for more than 100 years they had ruled this place without mercy. Once long ago, humans from Earth had come to this world with dreams and hope. They had built farms and schools and families, but the Great War in the galaxy cut them off. No ships came, no messages arrived, and year after year the people waited. They watched the sky for the blue and white flag of Earth, but nothing came. Slowly they began to believe the galaxy had forgotten them, and maybe even Earth had fallen. The Tarkhan told them this often. They said Earth was dust now, and the humans here were nothing but a lost tribe waiting to fade away. Kara Vin was a young woman with black hair tied in a rough knot. Her hands were stained with grease from the small workshop where she fixed broken machines. She could repair old radios, farm pumps, even small hover bikes, though parts were rare, and she had to make many from scraps. She kept her head down when Tarkhan guards passed by, but inside she felt a quiet fire, a stubborn refusal to believe the words of the Tarkhan. She had heard the old stories from her grandfather, who had once seen Earth soldiers in shining armor. He had told her they would return one day, though now he was gone and his stories were only a whisper in her mind. That evening, as the twin moons began to rise, Kara walked home with a small bag of food. She passed a corner where two Tarkhan soldiers stood laughing with rough voices. One of them said in the alien tongue that humans would soon be replaced by another slave race, that no help was coming because Earth was gone. Kara's hands tightened around her bag. She wanted to shout at them, but she knew the punishment for speaking back, so she kept walking, yet the words cut into her like cold knives. As she reached the edge of the city, she stopped. The wind had changed. It carried a low hum that she had never heard before. She looked up and saw streaks of white light sliding across the orange sky. They moved too fast and too smooth to be shooting stars. Their paths were controlled, deliberate. The people around her pointed and murmured, some thinking it was just debris from some far battle. But Kara's heart began to pound. Something deep inside her said these lights were not random. They were coming here with purpose. High above the dusty clouds, far beyond the eyes of the Tarkhan scanners, a great shape moved in silence. It was a warship of black steel, with edges sharp like a blade. Its hull carried marks of old battles and scars of fire, but on its side a faded emblem still shone. The blue and white flag of Earth. Though worn by time, it was unbroken. It stood as a promise, a sign that the lost were not alone. Inside this ship, men and women moved with quiet precision. They wore dark armor that hugged their bodies, their faces hard with focus, their voices low as they spoke through headsets. The leader stood at the center, his eyes fixed on a map of Aurelia glowing in blue light. His name was Captain Jace Rourke, and he had come here for one reason: to take back what was stolen. On the ground, Kara could feel the hum growing stronger. It was faint but constant, like the breath of something vast waiting to wake. She ran to her small workshop and grabbed an old radio she had been trying to repair. She turned the dials slowly, searching for any sound. For a moment there was only static, then she caught it. A human voice, sharp and calm, saying words she did not understand but filled with command. Hold position. Prepare for insertion. The voice faded and came back again, repeating the same phrase. Her hand shook. She knew this was no Tarkhan speech. These were humans, real humans from beyond the stars, and they were close. In the Tarkhan command post in the city center, the alien officers sat around a table, speaking of trade routes and mining quotas. None of them noticed the thin trace of new ships in orbit. Their scanners saw nothing unusual, for the Earth fleet had hidden itself behind advanced stealth screens. Even the Tarkhan satellites drifting high above reported only empty space. The commander of Raktel leaned back in his seat, sure of his control, He believed Virelia would remain in his claws forever. Yet, even as he thought this, drops of silent fire were already falling toward the forests outside the city. Back aboard the flagship Resolute, Captain Rourke looked out at the planet turning slowly below, his jaw set, his voice quiet as he gave the order to begin Phase 1. Small craft separated from the main ship, each shaped like a black arrow, sliding into the atmosphere without a sound, their hulls heating but never flashing bright. They were ghosts in the sky, carrying the first wave of Earth's shock troopers. Each soldier inside sat still, eyes closed, remembering the mission to strike fast, to free the colony, to make the Tarkhan fear the humans once again. Kara stepped outside her workshop as the night grew deeper. The streaks of light had vanished now, but the feeling in her chest remained, a sense that something enormous was moving closer with every breath. The streets were almost empty. Only the slow march of a Tarkhan patrol echoed between the stone walls. But somewhere out there in the darkness beyond the hills, she thought she saw a shadow move, larger than a man, and yet as quiet as the wind. It slipped between the ruins and was gone, leaving her staring into the night with wide eyes, wondering if she had just seen the first sign that her grandfather's stories were about to come true. Above the silent world of Virelia, the fleet of Earth hung like shadows among the stars, hidden under layers of stealth technology that made them almost invisible even to the most advanced Tarkhan scanners. The great flagship Resolute floated at the center like the heart of a hunting beast, its black hull swallowing the faint light from the distant sun, its lines sharp and purposeful, every surface built for war. Its crew moved with quiet precision, each soldier and officer carrying the weight of the mission in their eyes, for they had traveled far through enemy space and taken many risks to reach this forgotten world, and now every second mattered. On the bridge, Captain Jace Rourke stood with his hands behind his back, staring at the faint curve of the planet below the map. In front of him showed glowing markers for known Tarkhan patrols and defense towers, each one a target, each one a threat. His voice was low and calm as he gave orders to the officers around him. He knew they could not make a single mistake, for the Tarkhan Empire had long memory, and if they sensed the presence of an Earth fleet, they would send a swarm of warships before the liberation could begin. Rourke's mind went back to the old reports he had read of Aurelia's fall, of how the last Earth supply ship had been destroyed in orbit a century ago, leaving thousands of colonists trapped under Tarkhan rule, and how no one had been able to return until now. Far below, in the streets of the capital city, the Tarkhan guards walked in pairs, their long claws clicking against their armor as they patrolled narrow alleys and dusty squares. The markets were closing for the night, the human merchants packing away their meager goods. Under the watchful eyes of their alien overseers in the shadows, Kara Gavin slipped between old stone walls, her mind still echoing with the strange human voice she had heard on her repaired radio. She clutched the device under her coat, afraid that a Tarkhan might hear it, but unwilling to let go, for it was proof that somewhere up there in the sky her own people were near. The Tarkhan command post sat like a fortress in the center of the city, its walls built of black alloy taken from the mines of conquered worlds. Inside, Commander Vraktel paced the floor, his heavy tail sweeping across the smooth surface. He had felt a strange unease all evening, though he could not explain why. The scanners showed nothing unusual, and his officers assured him the skies were clear, yet something about the quiet outside felt wrong, as if a storm was waiting beyond the horizon. He gave orders for the patrols to tighten their routes and for the night watch to double in size. Still, he could not shake the thought that unseen eyes were watching. In the forests outside the city, a different kind of movement was taking place under the cover of tall trees and thick leaves. Small shapes dropped from the sky with barely a whisper. These were the drop pods of Earth, shaped like black arrows. They slid through the atmosphere with such precision that they landed exactly where planned soldiers stepped out of them, their armor a deep matte color that blended with the night, their helmets fitted with soft, glowing visors that scanned the terrain. They moved without a sound, weapons ready, their orders clear: recon, first contact, later avoid detection unless absolutely necessary. One squad moved toward a ridge overlooking the city. Their leader, Sergeant Hale, raised his fist for the group. to stop crouching low. He scanned the streets below through a scope marking the position of Tarkon patrols and defense emplacements. He tapped the side of his helmet, sending the data back to the Resolute. High above, every movement, every light, every alien position was being recorded for the assault plan. Kara was making her way home through the outer streets when she heard the faint crunch of leaves behind her. She froze, turning her head slowly in the dim light. She saw a figure taller than most humans, clad in dark armor, standing among the shadows. The figure tilted its head, as if listening, then stepped forward, the visor reflecting a faint green glow. She almost ran, but something in the way the figure moved told her it was not Tarkon. He lifted a hand in a slow, calming motion, and his voice came in a whisper softer than the wind. Stay quiet, help is coming. Before she could speak, he was gone, vanishing between the ruined buildings, as if the night had swallowed him. Her heart pounded in her chest. She hurried home, locking the door behind her, the words replaying again and again. Help is coming. She sat in the dark, holding the radio and staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had imagined it. But deep down she knew she had not. Somewhere out there humans were walking the same ground again, and the Tarkon did not know. Back in orbit, Captain Rourke received the first recon data. His eyes narrowed as he studied the map. Tarkon defenses were strong, but predictable. They had grown lazy over the decades, thinking no enemy could reach this far without being seen. The plan was forming in his mind. Phase 1 would cripple their eyes and ears before they could even call for help. Then the real strike would begin. He gave the order for the fleet to hold position. For now, the Tarkon must continue believing they were alone in the night. The Tarkon commander, meanwhile, sat in his chamber, still restless. He called for a scout vessel to sweep the upper atmosphere, just to be certain. The small craft lifted off the landing pad, its engines whining as it climbed through the clouds above the capital city. The pilot scanned the sky, reading nothing but static on the long-range sensors. It was as if the upper orbit was empty, but in truth the scout was already flying within range of Earth's cloaked ships. The crew on the Resolute watched the small vessel pass across their hidden position, unseen and unheard, like a shadow passing under a greater shadow. Down in the forest, Sergeant Hale and his squad found an old tunnel leading toward the city. Kara's grandfather had once told her of these tunnels, built in the first years of the colony. They had been used to move supplies quickly. Now they were overgrown and half collapsed, but still passable. Hale marked it on his map for later use. These tunnels could be the key to slipping under the Tarkon defenses when the time came. Night deepened over Virilia, the twin moons casting silver light over the quiet streets. The people slept, unaware that above them an entire fleet waited in silence, holding its breath. The Tarkon slept, too confident in their power. Yet far above and all around them the noose was already tightening. Each soldier on the Resolute felt the weight of the moment. They had come to free the forgotten and to remind the galaxy that humans do not fade quietly. The city of Virilia lay under the soft glow of the twin moons, its narrow streets empty, except for the slow march of Tarkon patrols, their boots clicking against the stone, while their sharp eyes scanned every doorway. The alien guards moved like hunters, sure of their control. The people slept in silence, believing tomorrow would be the same as yesterday. Yet in the forest beyond the outer wall, something moved that would break the pattern forever. Sergeant Hale and his squad crouched under the cover of the tall trees, their armor dark and smooth, blending with the night. One soldier tapped a small device on his wrist, showing a map of the Tarkon guard routes. Tiny red lights marked the patrols moving through the streets. The humans had studied these patterns for hours, and now they knew exactly when and where the aliens would be least prepared. Kara Vin could not sleep. Her mind kept turning over the words of the armored figure who had whispered to her, help is coming. She sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The air smelled of dust and metal. Somewhere far away, a Tarkon horn sounded, calling a patrol to change direction. Her heart jumped when she saw the shadow slip across the rooftops, moving faster than any Tarkon could. The shape stopped for a moment, then disappeared behind a chimney. She was certain it was another human soldier. In the Tarkon command post, Commander Vractel stood with his arms folded, listening to the night watch report. They claimed all sectors were calm, yet he still felt a strange pressure in the air, as if something unseen was drawing closer with each breath. He ordered more patrols to the outer districts, But he could not see the truth that Earth's warriors were already inside his territory, moving unseen like the wind through the grass. Hale's squad reached the edge of an old supply tunnel hidden under a layer of vines. The entrance was narrow, but led deep toward the city. He sent 2 soldiers inside to check for traps while the rest kept watching the trees. One of them signaled all clear, and they moved forward. The tunnel smelled of damp stone, and rust water dripped from cracks above their boots, splashing softly. With each step their lights stayed dim, casting only enough glow to see the path. The sound of distant machinery echoed faintly from somewhere ahead. Kara decided she could not stay inside any longer. She slipped on her boots and wrapped a scarf around her head, then took her small toolkit and the radio. She stepped into the street, moving quietly toward the outer edge of the city where the old workshops stood. Most people avoided this area at night, but she knew it had many hiding places, and from here, she could listen for the strange human voice again. As she walked, she kept glancing upward at the rooftops, half expecting to see another shadow. Back in the tunnel, Hale's squad reached a sealed door thick with age and covered in layers of dust. One soldier placed a small cutting tool against the hinges. The metal glowed faintly as the tool worked through it. The sound was barely audible above the soft drip of water. Finally, the door gave way, revealing a small chamber filled with crates and barrels. Hale opened one to find old supplies marked with faded earth symbols, proof that this colony had once been strong and well supported. The sight filled the soldiers with quiet anger at how far their people had been pushed down. In orbit above the planet, Captain Rourke received the first live feed from Hale's squad. He watched as the crates were opened and the old Earth flag was found still folded inside. One of them, the captain's eyes hardened. He knew this would be the rallying point for the colonists once the operation began, but for now the mission was still in the shadow stage. No Tarkon must know of their presence. Kara reached the outer district and moved toward the old machine yard, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. She froze when she saw a faint green glow moving between the rusted frames of abandoned vehicles. Slowly, a figure emerged from behind a large transport, its armor matching the one she had seen before. The soldier looked at her without raising a weapon, his voice quiet and steady. "You should not be here. It is not safe," she whispered back. "Are you from Earth?" He did not answer directly. Instead, he asked, "Do you know the old supply tunnels?" She nodded slowly. The soldier stepped closer, then said, "Tomorrow you will guide someone through them." Then he turned and walked away, vanishing into the maze of machines. She stood there for a long moment, her heart racing, unsure if this was a dream or reality. Then she hurried back to her home, gripping the radio tighter than ever, the words "tomorrow you will guide someone through them" echoing in her mind. In the command post fractal paste near the central console, the scanners still showed nothing unusual, but the commander ordered the patrols to search the outer workshops. He felt certain that if trouble came, it would enter from the edges, not the center. The Tarkon were confident in their defenses, but their overconfidence was the very crack the humans needed. Hale's squad moved deeper into the tunnel system, marking every path and counting every turn. They found a grate that opened into the heart of the city, directly under one of the Tarkon guard towers. Hale smiled under his helmet. This will be the perfect entry point. When the time came, he sent the data to the Resolute, then ordered his team to pull back before dawn to avoid discovery. High above the sleeping city, the cloaked fleet adjusted position, tiny bursts of thrusters, moving the ships into a tighter formation like wolves preparing to strike. Captain Rourke reviewed every detail: the timing of the first explosions, the disabling of the Tarkon communications, the deployment of ground forces. Every move had to be perfect, because once they revealed themselves, there would be no turning back. Kara lay in bed, unable to sleep, her mind replaying the image of the soldier in the machine yard. She felt a strange mix of fear and hope: fear of what the Tarkon might do if they discovered her contact with these strangers, and hope that maybe the long silence from Earth was ending. She thought of her grandfather's stories of shining ships and fearless warriors, and wondered if by this time tomorrow she would see them in the sky again. Far away in the forest, Hale's squad melted back into the shadows, disappearing as quietly as they had arrived. The path to the city was ready. The tunnels were mapped, the entry point chosen. Now all that remained was to wait for the signal from the captain. The storm was coming, and the Tarkon would never see it until it was too late. The dawn came slow over Virilia, the twin moons fading into the pale orange sky as the sun climbed above the jagged hills. The streets were still quiet, the air heavy with the smell of dust, and the faint tang of metal. In the Tarkon command post, Commander Vractel stood before a wall of glowing maps, his claws tapping against the surface as he studied the patrol patterns below. The city seemed calm, yet the unease in his chest had only grown through the night. He ordered an early inspection of the defense towers. His officers moved quickly to obey, unaware that their enemies had already slipped deep into the heart of the city. In the tunnels beneath the streets, Sergeant Hale and his squad crouched in the shadows. The grate above them showed a slice of light from the waking world outside. They could hear the faint voices of Tarkon guards and the distant rumble of a transport passing over the cobblestone. Their weapons were ready, their armor warm from the slow breath of underground air. Hale looked at each soldier in turn and gave a single nod, the signal to move. Above the city, in the cold vacuum of orbit, the Resolute hung like a predator in the dark, the stealth shields still active, the crew silent. As Captain Rourke gave the final order, phase 1 began. Across the fleet's small pods, detached from the larger ships, each carrying a cluster of guided charges, they fell toward the planet without sound or flame, the cloaking fields wrapping them in shadow until they were less than 100 meters from their targets. Kara Vin woke to the sound of a low rumble, her eyes opening to see dust drifting from the ceiling. She leapt to her feet, grabbing the radio from the table. She turned the dial and caught the sharp voice again. Hold position, targets in sight. Seconds later, the rumble became a deep shudder as far away one of the Tarkon defense towers erupted into a bloom of orange fire. The shockwave rolled through the streets, windows rattling, walls trembling. People screamed and ran for cover. Hale's squad moved fast through the tunnels, following the map they had made the day before. Above them, more explosions shook the ground. The Tarkon communications network was collapsing piece by piece. The charges from orbit had struck power stations, signal hubs, and watchtowers, every piece of the alien control structure falling in the first wave. Hale reached the ladder that led into the guard tower base. He climbed quickly, the metal warm from the heat of the blasts above. Pushing the hatch open, he emerged into chaos. Tarkon soldiers shouting into dead radios, smoke pouring from the corners of the room. Before they could react, Hale's squad was on them, moving with precision, each enemy disarmed and bound in seconds. In the capital streets, the people stared in shock at the black shapes descending from the clouds, dropships marked with the faded flag of Earth, engines roaring as they touched down in open squares and wide avenues, their sides opening to release squads of armored soldiers, weapons ready, shields glowing faintly. The humans from Earth moved with practiced speed, securing positions and guiding civilians away from the fighting. The Tarkon fired back, but found their shots blocked or dodged, as if the soldiers knew their aim before they fired. Kara ran toward the noise, her heart pounding. She saw a dropship land in the market square, the blast of air from its engines knocking dust and debris into the air. When the door dropped, she saw them, real humans in dark armor, their movements sharp and confident, their helmets reflecting the rising sun. One of them spotted her and waved her over, shouting, "We need a guide through the tunnels." She nodded instantly and led them toward the hidden entrance she knew in the outer district, the very path Hale's team had mapped only hours before. In orbit, the Tarkon fleet began to stir their sensors, finally picking up the presence of the Earth ships. But before they could organize a counter-strike, the rest of the human fleet revealed itself, weapons glowing with deadly light railguns and missile pods locking onto the alien vessels. The first volley tore through the lead Tarkon cruiser, splitting it into two burning halves that tumbled toward the planet like falling stars. The space above Aurelia became a field of fire and shadow, each side trading blows, but the humans striking harder and faster. On the ground, Vractel roared his orders, his voice echoing through the command post. He sent his elite guard to hold the palace steps and ordered the city gates sealed, but his words fell into chaos as reports came in of Earth troops inside the city center already cutting through his defenses. The alien commander's tail lashed the floor with fury. He had underestimated the humans, and now his control was slipping away. Hale's squad emerged from the tunnels in the center of the city, just behind the largest Tarkon checkpoint. The guards, they were already distracted by the fighting in the streets, giving Hale's team the perfect chance to strike. They moved like a single machine, disabling the barricades and opening a path for the main Earth force to push through. Moments later, Kara arrived with the second squad, leading them through the cleared route. The two units met and pressed forward together. Everywhere in the city, the people of Aurelia were watching the impossible unfold. Some joined the fight, grabbing old rifles hidden in their homes, others threw stones or blocked Tarkon paths. With overturned carts, the air was filled with the sharp crack of gunfire, the roar of engines, and the shouts of soldiers giving orders in short, clipped tones. The Tarkons still outnumbered the humans, but their advantage was crumbling as the organized precision of the Earth troops cut them down piece by piece. Kara guided the soldiers through narrow alleys toward the palace. She knew this path well from her childhood, when she had run errands here with her grandfather. The walls were scarred with old bullet marks, the air hot from the nearby fires. The soldiers moved in pairs, covering each other. At every turn, one of them handed her a small device, telling her to press it. If she saw any Tarkon ahead, she tucked it in her pocket, her hands shaking with adrenaline. In the Tarkon command post, Vractel looked at the live feed from the outer districts, showing Earth soldiers advancing steadily. His claws dug into the metal console, leaving deep grooves. He knew that if the palace fell, his control of Aurelia would end. He barked in order to prepare the last defense lines and to send a distress signal to the Tarkon High Fleet. But when his officers tried the signal, they found only static. The Earth forces had already cut the channel. Back aboard the Resolute, Captain Rourke watched the ground operation unfold with calm focus, his voice steady as he ordered the next phase dropships with heavy support units to land in the palace courtyard to finish the fight and claim the heart of the city. His crew moved quickly, each step bringing the mission closer to its goal, the liberation of Aurelia. Kara could see the high walls of the palace ahead, the black metal gleaming in the sunlight. She heard the rising roar of engines above and looked up to see more dropships coming in low, their guns flashing against the Tarkon positions. This was at the moment her people had waited for all their lives. She pushed forward with the soldiers, her eyes fixed on the gates ahead, knowing that beyond them the real battle was about to begin. The palace gates loomed ahead, dark and cold under the growing light of day, their tall black metal walls lined with alien carvings that told the story of Tarkon conquest. Kara stood just behind the Earth soldiers, her breath quick as the dropships above rained fire on the guard towers, each blast shaking the ground and filling the air with heat and dust. The Tarkon defenders fired back from the walls, but their shots struck only the shields of the approaching troops. The humans moved in tight formation, their armor glinting with faint reflections of the burning sky, each step forward breaking a century of silence. Inside the city, the people began to stir, not with fear, but with something they had almost forgotten, hope. Men and women peered from windows and rooftops, seeing the flag of Earth on the shoulders of the soldiers, hearing the crack of human rifles against Tarkon armor. Old rifles hidden for generations were pulled from under floors and behind walls. Some colonists carried farming tools turned into weapons, others carried nothing but heavy stones. Yet they moved toward the sound of battle, drawn by the thought that maybe at last they could fight back. Commander Vractel watched the palace square from a high balcony, his eyes narrowing as the Earth troops closed in. He barked orders to his guard to hold the line, promising them reward if they pushed the humans back. But even as he spoke, he could see the fear in their movements. The precision of the Earth assault was breaking their confidence. The humans did not advance like scattered rebels. They came as one solid force, covering each other in perfect rhythm. Kara and the squad reached the side entrance to the palace, where the gate controls were hidden in a reinforced post. The Earth sergeant beside her signaled for two soldiers to cover the door, while she slipped inside. The room smelled of hot metal and oil. The controls sat on a panel covered in Tarkon symbols she had never seen before, but her hands moved quickly, remembering the way similar machines worked. She pulled wires and pressed switches until the gears above groaned and the heavy locks began to turn. The gate shuddered open just enough for the first line of Earth troops to slip through. In the streets behind them, the people of Aurelia were rising in numbers. They moved in small groups, striking at isolated Tarkon patrols, using the narrow alleys to their advantage. The Tarkon fired wildly into the crowds, but the humans from Earth covered them, pushing forward to secure each block. Old banners with the faded blue and white flag were pulled from hiding and hung from windows. The sight of them gave the soldiers strength and made the Tarkhan hesitate. Vractel roared with rage as a report came in that the outer districts had fallen to combined Earth and colonist control. He ordered the palace guard to form a shield wall at the main entrance, but even as they moved, the first Earth-heavy units dropped into the courtyard, their boots shaking the stones as they deployed larger weapons. These were designed to punch through fortified positions, their barrels glowing faintly as they charged. Kara stayed low behind a broken pillar as the first blast tore into the Tarkhan shield wall, the impact throwing several guards backward. The air filled with smoke and heat. The Earth troops surged forward, their rifles cutting through the gaps in the alien armor, every movement timed with precision, each soldier watching the others flank. The Tarkhan fought back with claws and blades, but the humans met them with steel and fire. The sound of battle rolled through the palace halls, carrying to every corner of the city. More colonists joined the fight, their courage growing with each step they took beside the Earth soldiers. Some carried the wounded to safety, others brought ammunition or guided troops through hidden paths known only to locals. Even children ran messages between fighters, ducking under stray fire with quick steps and bright eyes that no longer looked only to the ground. Vractel fell back toward the inner chamber of the palace, his mind racing. He knew he could still call for help from the Tarkhan High Fleet if he reached the secure channel there. But as he tried to activate it, only static answered. The Earth assault had cut the last link. He snarled in frustration, slamming his claw into the console, leaving deep dents in the metal. Outside the palace gates, the fighting grew heavier. The Tarkhan guard began to break under the relentless push. The Earth-heavy units kept firing, carving paths through their defenses. Kara moved with a small group of colonists, using the chaos to drag injured civilians out of the line of fire. She caught sight of the same soldier she had met in the machine yard, his armor scratched and smoking, yet his movements as sharp as before. He saw her and gave a quick nod before turning to block a Tarkhan blade aimed at his squad mate. The Earth fleet in orbit maintained its position above the city, intercepting any Tarkhan ships that tried to enter the atmosphere. The space above Aurelia was lit with the bright flares of explosions, each one marking another enemy vessel destroyed. The Tarkhan could send no help, their forces trapped outside by the wall of human steel and fire. Inside the palace, the Earth soldiers breached the grand hall, its high ceiling and black stone pillars echoing with the sound of gunfire. Vractel stood at the far end, flanked by his last guard. He bellowed a challenge, his voice shaking the air, promising to crush the invaders. But the humans advanced without pause, each step bringing them closer. The Tarkhan rushed forward, their claws slashing, their blades flashing, but the humans met them head-on, moving as one. The clash filled the hall with the roar of battle, the ring of metal, and the hiss of energy weapons. Kara watched from the archway, gripping a piece of fallen stone, as if it could shield her. She had never seen such a fight. The Tarkhan were larger and stronger, but the humans were faster and more disciplined. Every strike had purpose, every move covered by another soldier. It was like watching a living wall of courage pushing forward inch by inch. The colonists outside cheered as word spread that the palace gates had fallen. They surged into the courtyard, their voices rising in a chant. "We are not forgotten." The sound carried even into the grand hall, making Vractel falter for a heartbeat. That moment was enough for the lead Earth soldier to strike, knocking the commander's weapon from his hand and forcing him to the ground. The Tarkhan guard broke under the sight, their leader fallen. The humans pressed the advantage, securing the hall and locking the remaining enemies in side chambers. Kara stepped forward, her eyes locked on the Earth soldier who stood over the defeated commander. His visor turned toward her. For a moment, she thought she saw a faint smile beneath the armor. Then he spoke in a voice clear and steady. "The city is yours." The smoke had barely begun to clear from the palace courtyard when the deep vibration rolled through the air. It was a sound no one in Aurelia had heard in generations, the sound of a massive warship entering the upper atmosphere. People looked up, their faces pale under the orange glow of the rising sun. And there, it was a dark shape blotting out the sky, a Tarkhan dreadnought, so vast it seemed to swallow the horizon, its armored hull glimmering with the light of the burning city below. On the palace balcony, Kara stared upward, her stomach twisting. The Earth soldiers around her turned their weapons toward the sky, though they knew they could not hit something that high. The dreadnought moved with slow power, a predator sure of its kill. From its underside, massive ports began to open, revealing the long barrels of orbital cannons. These weapons were not meant to fight ships, they were designed to erase cities in minutes. The lead Earth officer lifted his communicator, his voice sharp, to the fleet above. Incoming heavy ship, coordinates locked, all fire on my mark. High Command responded with a curt acknowledgement, already adjusting their own positions in orbit. The human ships, they were smaller, but faster, built for speed and precision rather than raw power. Yet they could not let the dreadnought fire. If even one of its city busters struck the surface, tens of thousands would die. In the streets, the colonists saw the shadow of the dreadnought spreading across their homes. They moved faster, clearing wounded from open areas and pulling heavy weapons into position. Old anti-air cannons were dragged from storage by teams of sweating men and women, their barrels rusted, but still capable of firing. The Tarkhan might have forgotten these hidden weapons, but the people had not. The first shot from the dreadnought came without warning, a beam of molten light that sliced through the outer district, vaporizing a block. In seconds, the shockwave followed, shattering windows across half the city. The ground shook, as if the world itself was breaking. People stumbled, screams filled the air. But before the dreadnought could fire again, streaks of white light rose from the horizon. Earth fleet fighters diving into the atmosphere, their engines howling like thunder. The sky became a battlefield, ships weaving between blasts of energy, the dreadnoughts' shields flaring as they absorbed impacts. But each hit slowed it just enough. The Earth fleet began to focus on one section of the shield, hammering it with coordinated strikes. Kara could see the flashes from the palace roof, the bursts of light reflecting in her eyes. Each one assigned, the humans were still holding the line above. Inside the palace, the Earth soldiers fortified positions, knowing the dreadnought might attempt a ground drop. They set heavy weapons on balconies and in windows, their barrels pointed to the sky. The colonists joined them, bringing crates of ammunition and fresh water, moving with the discipline of those who knew this was their only chance. The Tarkhan prisoners were locked deep in the lower cells, their roars muffled by the thick stone walls. Commander Vraktel knelt in his bindings, watching the battle from the floor of the Grand Hall. His eyes burned with fury as the dreadnought above moved into firing position again. He knew the ship's captain and believed no human fleet could withstand its guns. But even as he thought it, another wave of Earth bombers swept past, dropping specialized charges that clung to the dreadnought's hull before detonating in sharp bursts of blue light. The ship shuddered, its shield flashing and then flickering for the briefest moment. In that gap, a human destroyer dived close, firing every weapon it had. The blast tore a jagged wound along the side of the dreadnought, sending debris spinning into the clouds. The Tarkhan ship tilted slightly, losing altitude, but its massive engines roared to life, holding it steady. Back on the ground, the colonists cheered at the sight of the damage, yet they knew the fight was far from over. The dreadnought began to deploy landing craft, sleek black vessels that dropped from its belly like falling knives, each one carrying squads of Tarkhan shock troops. The first wave hit the streets near the palace, the impact shaking the stones as their doors burst open, armored figures charging out with heavy blades and energy rifles. The battle returned to the streets in a storm of fire and steel. Earth soldiers met the Tarkhan in brutal close combat, the narrow alleys turning into choke points where every inch of ground was paid for in blood. Kara stayed behind a barricade with two other colonists, firing an old rifle into the advancing enemy, her arms shaking with each recoil. Yet she did not stop. Every shot was one less Tarkhan reaching the palace. Above the city, the dreadnought continued to trade fire with the human fleet, each explosion painting the clouds in bright flashes. The smaller human ships moved like hunters, striking and vanishing before the dreadnought's heavy guns could track them one by one. They tore away at its defenses, targeting its weapon ports and engine housings, every hit buying precious seconds for those fighting on the ground. A sudden explosion near the palace gates threw Kara to the ground, her ears ringing. When she looked up, she saw the soldier she had met in the machine yard, pulling her to her feet. Without a word, his visor cracked, his armor scorched. Yet his grip steady. Together, they fell back toward the main hall, where Earth officers were regrouping for a counter-push. The Tarkhan were trying to break through in one final surge to reach the palace. The lead officer's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold them here. The fleet will take that monster out in 3 minutes. We just have to survive." Until then, those words passed quickly through the defenders, each fighter holding their position as the Tarkon pressed harder. The air filled with smoke. The walls shook with the constant impact of fire, but no one broke formation. In the final minute, the sky seemed to rip open as the largest human ship in orbit descended into the atmosphere, its hull glowing from re-entry. It dove straight toward the dreadnought, ignoring the defensive fire, hammering its shields at point-blank range, unleashed a full barrage of missiles. The dreadnought's armor cracked in a brilliant chain of explosions. Flames burst from its engines, and its great shape began to tilt, its shadow slipping away from the city as it fell. The crash came far from Varelia, a thunderous impact that sent a deep tremor through the ground. The Tarkon shock troops in the streets froze their eyes, turning toward the smoke rising in the distance. In that moment of hesitation, the humans and colonists surged forward, driving them back in a wave of steel and fire. The dreadnought was gone, and with it the last hope of Tarkon victory. Kara stood on the balcony, once more her rifle hanging at her side. The city below was scarred and burning, yet for the first time she felt the weight in her chest lift. She turned to see the Earth soldier remove his cracked helmet, his face young, but his eyes older than his years. He gave a small nod, then looked toward the horizon, as if already thinking of the battles yet to come. The morning after the fall of the dreadnought, the air over Varelia was still heavy with smoke and the scent of burned stone, yet the silence was strange. It was not the fearful silence of waiting for the next attack, but the kind that follows a storm when the wind stops and the sky is clearing slowly. The colonists began to emerge from the ruins, carrying the wounded on stretchers and pulling blankets around those who had fought all night. The Earth soldiers walked the streets with weapons at ease, scanning for any last Tarkon holdouts, but finding only abandoned rifles and shattered armor. Kara stood on the same balcony where she had watched the massive shadow of the dreadnought days ago. Now, she looked out at a city scarred but still standing. She could see children in the streets for the first time since the fighting began, their laughter faint under the sound of cleanup work in the distance. Crews were already lifting the Tarkon wreckage into great piles and cutting away the burnt timbers. The colonists worked side by side with the human troops, passing tools, sharing water, and speaking in quiet voices. In the Grand Hall, the surviving Tarkon prisoners were being led away by armed guards. Their leader, Commander Vrak Tel, walked with his head low, his eyes dark, with something between rage and disbelief. He had believed humans were gone forever, nothing more than a fading story told in low voices. Yet here, they were flesh and blood with ships and weapons and allies. His defeat was more than personal. It was the breaking of a myth. Far above Varelia, the human fleet was not still. Transmissions were flying between ships and across the void, carrying one message to every listening post on every frequency. The humans had returned. The message was short and clear: "This is the fleet of Earth to all colonies. We hear you. We are coming." And across the stars and distant systems that had long given up hope, flickers of light began to appear on communication consoles. People stared at the screens, tears in their eyes, as the old blue and white flag of Earth shimmered into view. On the mining world of Rallos, a young woman dropped her tools when she heard the voice from her radio. On the frozen outpost of Eldis, old soldiers rose from their bunks, their hands trembling as they touched the familiar emblem on their jackets. In the deep forests of Arith, children who had never seen a human warship before pointed at the sky as a patrol frigate passed overhead, its silver hull glinting in the sunlight. The return of Earth was not just the end of one battle, it was the opening of a door that had been locked for generations. Back in Varelia, the Earth officers met with the leaders of the colony at a long table in the palace. The maps on the walls were updated with red and blue lines showing where Tarkon forces still held power and where the humans could strike next. Kara sat quietly in the back, listening to the plan. Each target was another colony, another group of people waiting in fear. Every victory here could send a message across the galaxy. The humans were not simply defending, they were reclaiming. The soldier who had fought beside Kara stood outside the hall speaking with a group of young colonists, his voice calm as he explained how they had trained for years in deep space, never certain if they would find survivors, yet always preparing for the day they might. He told them that the Tarkon had grown arrogant, believing no force could challenge them, And that was why this victory mattered so much, because now every Tarkon commander in the galaxy knew they could be beaten. That night the people gathered in the central square, the fires from the battle still glowing in the distance, but the air filled with voices as songs and stories began to rise. The old Earth anthem was played for the first time in Varelia since before the Tarkon invasion. The colonists sang, even those who did not know all the words, and the sound carried across the damaged streets, echoing off the walls. The human fleet above turned their running lights low in a silent salute to the people below. Kara sat by one of the small fires, holding a piece of broken stone from the palace wall. It was warm from the flames, but heavy in her hands. She thought of the years they had spent waiting, hiding, and wondering if anyone even remembered they existed. Now she knew they had not been forgotten. She felt something new in her chest, a quiet certainty that they were part of something larger, something that stretched far beyond the stars above. In the early hours before dawn, the human ships began to lift higher into the sky, preparing for the next jump. The colony watched as the sleek shapes rose past the clouds, their engines leaving pale trails in the dark. The largest ship paused above the city, turning slowly, its hull catching the first light of morning. Then, with a deep rumble, it vanished into the blackness, followed by the smaller ships, until only the faint shimmer of their passage remained. The people of Aurelia knew the war was not over, but they also knew they would never again face it alone. Messages from other worlds had already begun to arrive, some offering help, some asking for rescue. The return of humans had become a spark lighting a fire in every corner of the galaxy. The Tarkon Empire had ruled through fear, but now fear had begun to turn against them. As the sun rose, Kara walked through the market square past the stalls that were already being rebuilt. She saw children drawing ships in the dust with sticks, their voices bright as they argued over who could draw the biggest battleship. She passed an old man repairing a broken banner of Earth, his hand steady as he stitched the edges. She saw mothers and fathers speaking of the future, not in whispers, but in open voices for the first time in years. From that day, the story of Varelia spread far beyond its borders. It was told in mining camps and frozen outposts, in crowded city bars and quiet family homes. People spoke of the night the dreadnought fell, and the day the humans returned. They said that the galaxy had not forgotten them after all, and that Earth had come back not as a memory, but as a promise. And for those still living under the shadow of the Tarkon, that promise meant everything. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, the human fleet moved on toward the next world, carrying with it the hope of millions and the quiet, unspoken vow that no colony would ever be left alone again. The day the galaxy remembered was only the beginning.